I will hope to, but you know, we need to emphasize too that this came out of multi-mod, that there is a use case for this, and that there is no other solutions or IETF documents talking about this. So we felt like it was useful to have requirements, and we could put, I don't know. Did you work on some other solution in the past? I was trying to remember. Do we have only this one possible solution, or did you work on something else?
Yeah.
The only one?
Maybe you basically find the multimodal activity.
Yeah.
Except multimodal activity, except mine, there is no other.
So at least explain that this is a problem we want to solve, and we thought it was useful to agree on the requirements before we decided the solution. But yeah, we have at least one possible solution that we think that should meet the requirements, right?
And the solution of this is sure, and I'm really open by many ideas or many questions that covers it.
Yeah.
To make it sure.
Yeah. So I think it's almost mostly a discussion between Alvaro and the working group. So yeah, I mean, yeah, we will help to see what this happens.
Yeah, bro.
So, we're talking about
Yeah, we plan to
Here we are.
discuss.
Yeah.
Yes, I have a slot to discuss it. You know, I think we should discuss it in a meeting today.
Yes. Yes. And I saw in the meeting, the agenda, that you have the requirements.
Yeah.
That seems like we're going to talk about solution 2, right?
Mostly, I thought the main thing is how to proceed with the requirements, but we do have a solution draft.
Right.
We've had this for a while.
Yes, I know.
Yeah.
I mean, we can, you know, if we have time, we can talk more about the solution, but I thought that was not the most important today.
Right, because, you know, what surprised me is that the requirements seem very thin. And then initially thought there was no solution. You know why? Of course, if there's a solution, maybe the work is interesting.
Yeah, I mean, so I was going to say we wanted to work on this long ago, and we started both on requirements and a solution. But we figured it was best to, complete the requirements before we really picked a solution.
Right, even though the requirements are not long.
Yeah, we understand that. And those are good points. But we just haven't adopted any solution yet.
Right. There's only one as far as.
That's right.
Yeah,
That's right.
I mean, if people want to propose something else, they are welcome. But at least right now, we only have
Right,
one.
we actually at least know that the group not necessarily wants to work on that solution, but they want to work on this problem.
Mm-hmm.
So, if they don't want to work on the problem, then there's no solution right there.
Does your-
Just to know.
Does your draft reference at all this draft? No reference to that. Okay.
Yeah. It might be, I don't know, a matter of taste, but I feel like, when you do your requirements, you shouldn't, pick a particular solution or say that this is the solution we have. Requirements should be independent. I guess you could have an informational reference and say this is one potential solution.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think the main thing we need to figure out is, what exactly do we do with the draft? So next step, requirements draft.
Right. I mean, I don't know what you want to pass the working group, because it already passed last call, right?
Yeah. No, I would say I feel like it's mostly what do you need from us, or what would you advise us to do?
So what I really want to understand is whether the working group wants to work on this problem.
Yeah.
There's requirements, solve the problem.
Yeah.
There's obviously a problem.
Yeah.
So work to work on a solution to that.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
solution might be the one that's already there,
Yeah.
or something else. So what I want with you guys is that the AAG is not too happy with requirements. And this one is, I'm sorry if it's especially if I go there, we're all if I at least go there and I say, yes, but the work group has interest in working on this problem. We're still going to be killed, but this might be
You'll be,
maybe faster. Maybe they'll kill us faster.
you're taking the heat though, right? We don't have to take any of that heat?
Yes. So part of what I want to get out of this is how much heat do I want to take?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so one thing at least is, it was this multi-mob working group, and as part of that work, we came up with some solution that needs the stuff, and then we decided, okay, multi-mob is closing down, let's try to do this stuff. Yeah. And everyone that was working on this in multi-mob, yeah, they are here and are interested in working on this. So,
Well, hopefully there's more people that.
yeah, I hope so too.
That's a good hope. All right, look on the restroom real quick.
I guess the meeting actually has started. Yeah, we're a bit short on time here, so we should get started. Just realized it was already 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock here.
Okay.
Let's see. Okay.
So I'm going to partially take notes. We need someone to take official notes, and we can take them together if someone's willing to do that. It helps you follow the discussion and keeps you interested in what's going on. Anybody willing to do that? Thank you, Jake.
Great. Thanks. All right, so this is the PIM working group. And you should have seen it note well a few times.
Are these things going around or no?
Yeah, we need to.
Yeah.
And this is the agenda for today. Any issues with the agenda? All right, let's get started. So I'm quickly going to go through the working group status. We have a Ping Yang draft that is an RFC editor's queue. It should be an RFC in a few weeks, I would think. I'm not sure if it is waiting for any other Yang documents, but at least it's in the queue. There's an IGMP MLD Yang draft that has been revised a bit based on Yang doctor input and so on. And I'm not sure what the expert review is now. Is that another Yang doctor or?
Hi, I'm running AD. Yeah, so I thought that there was still some issue with the Yang doctors that it hasn't been solved. So I was waiting for that to be resolved. If that has been resolved, then we can move forward. But that's what I was waiting for.
Yeah, there was a long discussion and sort of like overall with that some design issues and how it fits into routing models in general. All right, and then there's an MSTP Yang draft, and that passed working group last call, and we are almost ready to go on. The only slight question is some people are saying that maybe it should be an experimental document because MSTP itself is experimental. So the question is whether the Yang model needs to be experimental because the protocol it supports is experimental. Maybe RAD might have some thoughts on that.
Hi, Alvaro Retana, Rodriguez again. So we had some discussions with the ASG about this because we've been getting Yang models for experimental protocols. And I think basically the conclusion there was, no, it doesn't have to be experimental. It can be experimental if the working group wants it to be experimental. But presumably this is something that people are going to go implement and use and, et cetera, and it's useful for interoperability and everything else. So standards track is okay if that's what the working group wants, right? So it's really up to you.
Yeah. So I don't think anyone really had an issue with it being standards track. I think it was more like a sort of like a question that was raised. But does anyone in the room have any thoughts on whether it should be experimental or not? At least right now, it's supposed to be proposed standard, and unless anyone has any issues with that, I guess we'll move on with that. All right, I'll check on the mailing list as well before we send it off for publication. Then we have the multiple upstream requirements draft that we'll discuss later today. Some concerns were raised by our AD. And DR load balancing was the last call that ended this Monday. So what should we do next about that?
Yeah, so this is a draft that Stig's on, so I'll speak to this. It didn't have a whole lot of response, but it did have a response to the working group last call. Jake made a few comments, and he's comfortable with this progressing as long as those concerns are addressed. So as long as the authors address Jake's comments, I think we are good to go with sending this off to Alvaro and the gang, unless anybody else has any concerns about this draft.
The DR load balancing.
Mankamna from Cisco. So I think Jake has commented about some IANA registry, and that we are going to update and upload the new version.
Okay. So given that and no other comments here in the room, then do that, and then we'll send it off to the ISG. It'll be done. Thanks.
All right. There's also an IGMP MLD snooping draft, and that's almost done. I have some slides on that later. We had a working group last call on this IPv4 prefix or IPv6 next hop. There were several comments that were raised, and the authors are planning to post a new version trying to address those comments. There's a DR improvement draft we'll discuss today. PIM explicit tracking. That draft hasn't been worked on in a while. So hoping that the authors will post a new version of that later. Otherwise, we have 3 drafts that just got adopted since the last IETF. So there's no changes since the previous versions. They just got resubmitted as working group documents. But the authors would be happy to receive comments and try to come up with some new version. For the BFD document, the author in particular wanted us to try to get input from the authors of the different DR improvement or the BDR drafts and so on, to see how this can be used for DR election. All right. The last thing I want to mention is implementation requirements. So the different routing area working groups all have different requirements for drafts or RFCs. And we haven't really talked much about it in this working group. I feel like our requirement is basically no requirement, which is the bottom one there. I'm curious if people feel like we should do something more than that. One thing we did for one draft at least was to have like an implementation status section. That's something pretty simple we could do. Personally, I'm not sure if we want to have any formal requirements for implementations, but at least knowing that implementations exist could be useful. But yeah, if people have any thoughts on this.
Jay Collin, I would love to have a pointer to implementations for the various standards. It's sometimes it can be hard to know where to look to find one. Yeah.
So no set requirement to do so, but
If there are implementations, it's good to know about them.
is that what you're suggesting? Okay. So kind of like the bottom bar. Stay low, but raise it a little bit.
Like the RFC
Sure, I'm fine with
1742.
no specific requirement, but if there are known requirements, I would like to have them documented. Yeah. Even a section that says there are no known implementations yet, and perhaps I don't know, a pointer would be good.
Yeah, so we'll ask people for input on the list as well. But I like that idea myself. All right, okay. So next presentation is IGP Mediga. Let's see.
I think it's Carlos, isn't it? Or...
No, I'm gonna do this for the authors. They couldn't be here,
okay.
so. But it's quick. So basically, after this was submitted to the ISG, it went to another young doctor review, and there were lots of comments and multiple emails back and forth and some additions to the draft. So this slide basically shows what got changed. I don't want to spend much time on this. It's better if people can go and look at it if they're interested. But as you can see, there were quite a few changes to the draft. And there's still some, some minor pending issues. So mainly this is just a heads up. If you care, please go and look at the draft, see what has changed, see if you're okay with the changes. If you feel like it, we could, try to do some kind of formal review in the working group, but yes, please have a look and try to keep you posted and maybe give you a couple of weeks for input before we move on. But yeah, there's quite a few changes. Okay. All right. Since we're a bit short on time here, just move on. So then we'll go on to the multiple upstreams.
Okay, I'm Carlos Bernardos. I'm presenting on behalf of my co-authors. We are having this presentation just to refresh the status of the document based or triggered by the comments from our ID. Can I? Okay, next one, please. Okay. So first, a refresh of the motivation of the draft. So basically, there are several situations, several scenarios in current networks based on the experience from the operators that we have in the as co-authors of the draft that require new solutions because with current solutions cannot be properly solved. And those scenarios are documented in the draft, but examples are the ones that are listed on the slide. The first one, multi-host wholesale offer for residential services, is basically when you have more than one operator, the incumbent operator and another service provider that are offering multicast services, and you want to have the possibility of choosing from which one you get the content. There are scenarios where for multicast resiliency, where you may have more than one provider, and you want to be able to switch if in case there is a failure. You may have scenarios for load balancing, in which just for sake of not overloading a particular segment of the network, you want to have multiple choices, network merging, multicast migration. There are several scenarios in the draft. So current solutions, or the way this could be solved, will be by using PIM end-to-end, but that has a limited deployment in current networks and is also a bit complex. So that's why IGMP MLD proxy with multiple upstream interfaces may be a simple solution for this, based on the fact that the proxies are widely deployed today, and you will avoid some complexities. So that's part of the motivation. Another part of the motivation that I didn't mention here is mentioned later in another slide. That's that we started working on this kind of need for multiple upstream interfaces in the multi-MOV working group. It was because of mobility-related requirements that trigger going to this working group, because the multi-MOV was closed. But then we also realized that there was not only mobility-related requirements, but also other requirements related to fixed networks, and all the requirements for both mobile and fixed networks are the ones that are, or all the scenarios, the ones that are documented in the draft. Next one, please. So the goal of the draft is to basically document those scenarios where we need some additional solutions. This support for multiple upstream interfaces that was already kind of discussed in the, I think, in the Magma working group some years ago, but at that time was decided not to go for that because of the complexity that will add to support like multi-home kind of scenarios with MLD IDMP proxies. But the fact is that the reality today is that we have this scenario, so we do have the need for this kind of extension. And in addition to describing or identifying the scenarios, is also to define the requirements that those scenarios pose for a potential solution on multiple upstream interfaces for IGMP MLD proxies. And then these requirements should help defining the solution. So we have clear documentation of what are the requirements that a potential solution may need to provide. Next one, please.
This works now, actually.
Okay, thank you. So the story of the draft, well, this was adopted back in IETF 92. As I mentioned, this came from multi-MOV working group, where we were dealing with mobility, but then the multi-MOV working group was closed, and this was meant to be the best placeholder or base home for this kind of work. Then we have been evolving the draft, including additional content, security, new applicability scenarios. And then in beginning of 2018, this year, we got some comments from our AD, and we took a while to address those comments. Apologies for that, but then we engaged into a discussion, and we were doing some changes that are summarized next. So from the AD, we got comments, for example, about the requirements being relatively simple. And it's true that they are simple, but it's also true that there is the need for those simple requirements to be addressed, because there is no current technology in operational networks that can be used. There is no other solution in IETF that can be applied to solve the requirement that we documented in the draft. There were some comments also on some requirements being generic and pretty obvious. And again, it's true that they are kind of straightforward, but it's also true that there is no solution for that those requirements reflect the need for having this kind of coordination action from the IGMP MLD proxy, optimizing the delivery from different points. More comments. There was a comment about some scenarios not having specific requirements, the requirement not being very specific. And for example, on the fast switching about interfaces, and we have added in the last version of the document pointers to video interruption kind of requirements that can be applied for this particular fast switching requirement. and the same for the service migration. So we have added additional details based on the AB review. There were also some comments about using kind of marketing-like statements, and we have tried to avoid the use of that kind of statement in the last revision of the draft, plus a few other editorial comments that we also addressed in the last version, which is 07. So next steps is to come up with a new version where we will be adding some additional operational details that AB also requested and that we didn't have time to put in the 07 version before the submission deadline, but those are easy to add because we have that into, actually we have some text in the discussion on the mailing list with AB. Then something that we would like to have for this session is to understand if there is any other aspect that you believe, the working group believes, that needs to be added into the draft, covered by the requirements draft. And then we believe that it's time for the solutions draft to take over and to basically work on the solution meeting the requirements that we have in the document. There is already one, that is the one that is mentioned in the slide, but I don't know if there may be other solutions that can be also proposed. But we believe that now it's time for really working on the solution draft. That's it from my side. I don't know if is there any comments from the working group?
Hi, Jake Holland. I had to go back and look at IETF 94, where some of the discussion about the requirements document took place, because when I read this, I didn't understand why it's useful. I guess what I'm wondering is, would it make sense to do these as a cluster, or is that the plan, or is the plan to make the requirements a released RFC that's informational and then later work on solutions? Like, I get that it's useful to kind of do, especially if there's multiple solutions that address subsets of the requirements, it makes sense to separate out the requirements document, but I'm not sure it makes sense to publish a requirements document without any solutions for an indeterminate time. At least I would find it confusing if encountering this in the wild. Yeah.
Would it make more sense for you to have the drafts published at the same time? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay. That's what we're looking for, is opinions on this. So thank you.
So as two separate RFCs or potentially a merged document, or I don't know if you're, I don't know if you say publish at the same time, or you're thinking maybe two different RFCs, so potentially, you know, requirements could be in the same document as the solution.
I'm agnostic on that point.
Yeah,
If you only plan to have one solution, I don't know why you need two docs, but it doesn't really matter. But if there might be more than one solution, I mean, the way it's written now, it's two RFCs. Feel free to combine them. I don't care. But yeah, just.
Yeah, I think at least the initial plan was to do requirements as a separate thing, but and in general that's good to do. But yeah, if you only have one solution, then it's maybe not that important. So I'm kind of curious. Well, we don't have that many people today, but I'm kind of curious how many people think this is interesting and are interested in contributing either to solutions or reviewing documents or maybe I can ask how many people here read the requirements document? Yeah, not too many. 2 people.
Jake again. I would be happy to try it out if there's a solution. It's especially if there's a test bed that demonstrates kind of the advantages over PIM. I don't have a very good intuitive understanding of it, but
You'd be happy to test it? Is that what I heard?
yeah, if you're asking for help with implementation or something, I would be interested in looking into it. Just, I haven't gone very far down that path. So yeah, I'd be certainly interested in understanding the pros and cons relative to other solutions.
So I think maybe what we could do is, well, one thing is what you have to say, next steps, try to improve the requirements a little bit. Otherwise, invite people to, well, read about the solution and see whether they're happy with the proposed solution or if they want to, think there's other ways of solving the problem. Toshi.
少し浅いだ。In my opinion, I think that clarifying the requirement is really important, even though we will finally need to provide a solution documentation. Because, for example, let's imagine that, for me, actually, I imagine that the multiple interface support for IGMP proxy may become something like RFC 4605 BIS, for example. This is because this is a very basic functionality that must be supported by new IGMP MLD proxy. So this idea, or RFC 4605 BIS, is maybe a final goal as a solution to support multiple interface. But someone may think that why we need to revise the proposal standard documentation, which is RFC 4605, and just to support multiple interface. Why? How many, what kind of use cases exist and how it's important? Maybe such kind of clarification is really needed to move the next activity forward to provide a new standard documentation, which is 4605 BIS. So I personally agree that we should continuously work on the clarification of requirement draft and to promote or to convince people why the multiple interface support is needed and how it's difficult and so on. So yeah, this is my opinion.
Yeah. Another thing I would like to do is to see if there's any existing implementations that try to do anything like this. And I know at least one implementation that can use different upstream for different groups.
Actually, I'm the author of this individual solution draft, but still there are lots of open issues. And today I don't have time to present what kind of open issue exists, but just to support multiple interface, there are a lot of things we need to address, and sometimes we may need to add a new IGMP MLD message or signaling, and this must be a very, very heavy task. Or if we don't have any special message to decide the multiple upstream interface, then how we can decide which upstream interface is best or better for what kind of scenario, for the scenario, for some scenario. So, well, just to support, so I think that's why Magma just ignored at that time to support multiple interface, because it's really heavy task, even though just to add one single or more upstream interface. So I don't want to start a long journey again for this IGMP MLD proxy specification, but I imagine it really takes time to complete the specification of this solution. So clarifying the requirement may be lighter task comparing with the solution definition, and that draft can motivate people to work or concentrate on that kind of discussion.
Do you feel that the existing requirements draft include enough detail for people to understand these issues?
I don't know. I don't know, but yeah, I hope so.
Yeah, because at least if possible, it could be nice to maybe have some more technical detail in the requirements draft that can clarify why this is a difficult problem, or what solutions need to solve or take care of. Maybe just think about it if there's something to add. All right. Okay.
Okay, so then just one clarifying question. So then next steps, we do have some updates in the pipeline, but after that, what will be the next steps? To continue with the publication process or to wait until the solutions draft is? So that was not clear to me.
Right. No, it's not clear to me either.
Alberto Rotana, Routing AD. So as the presentation started, this was motivated because I made some comments. I made some comments because this already passed working group last call. And so it surprised me very much that only 2 people raised their hand that they had actually read the draft, even though we don't have a full room. I would have hoped that more people had done that. So the reason for doing this presentation today was, this is just requirements. There is a solution that had been worked on many, many years ago. So my intent was to be able, if we're going to go forward with the publication process, to justify to the AESG that we're publishing a very light requirements document, but that at least the working group is interested in working on solutions. But no one raised their hand. Only Jake volunteered to maybe test something later. So what I think we should do going forward is this. I don't think I can justify the publication in the IETF stream. We can do one of 2 things. I'm going to return the document to the working group. If you want to go forward and publish it through the independent submission track, when it comes back to reviewing the IESG, I want to post it, and I'll make it go forward so it can be published as an RFC. It won't be an IETF document; it will be an independent document. If the working group decides that you need to keep that folded in for the potential future solution, and I say potential future solution because there's no guarantee that there will be a solution. That's up to the working group. So if you want to submit it as an individual independent submission, that's perfectly fine. We can go that path, but we won't go through the IETF process.
So maybe one way forward then would be to revise the document, but not go for publication yet, and then we start working on the solution. And as we work on the solution, we can see, if we find that the requirements need to be updated further. But once we have a solution that we are happy with, then we can hopefully ask for publication, and then we can point to the solution as well and say, we have 2 documents here, we have both the requirements and the solution.
Okay.
So thanks. Alvaro again. Going back to one point that Jake made before, that, and I agree with him, that if there's one solution, it seems obvious and nice to include the requirements and the justification of that solution in the same draft. That way, when people see the solution, they don't have to go look to see why this was made or where the requirements are, or when they see the requirements, they don't have to go look where the solution is, but they see everything together. My personal opinion, maybe take this as a working group member or whatever you want to take it, is that if that's going to happen, then do it in one, not 2 documents.
Okay.
Okay. So we don't have time to look at this solution really, but at least let me just show you. Let's see, where is it? So there is a solution that Hitachi has been presenting a couple of times. You can see the draft name here, and we don't have time now, but great if you can read this draft, and I hope we can discuss more about this solution next IETF. And if people think they have other solutions, that would be great as well. If you have some time all the way at the end of the meeting, Hitachi, you can maybe present a little bit, but we're out of time right now. So next on the agenda is MLD, IGMP MLD snooping and proxy Yang models.
Good afternoon, everyone. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Hongji. I'm from Ericsson. Now let me report the progress of the IGMP and MLD snooping Yang model. The latest version is version 5. According to the second round Young Doctors review comments, we have revised the documents and we have addressed most of the Young Doctors review comments. I think this draft is almost done. Now, these are details. The Young draft update information 1. We move the IGMP snooping instance and the MLD snooping instance and the control-plane protocol. Originally, the IGMP snooping instance are the list in the independent container. Now the latest hierarchy is like this. They are the IGMP snooping instance and the MLD snooping instance are both and augment the routing control-plane protocols, control-plane protocol, like this. Next, after update information 2, we move the statistics and the snooping instance. If you specify, this is the hierarchy. If you specify any IGMP snooping instance, and there is a list of statistics to the interfaces. These attributes are read-only. And now we have addressed almost all the comments from the Young Doctor except only one. This is a little problem. Which name is better? We define RPC called, its name is clear IGMP snooping groups, but the Young Doctor prefer another name. He thinks that it should be called clear IGMP snooping caches. At last, we achieved agreement to ask the PIM group which one is better. Next step. Now I think it's ready for, it's almost done, so we would like to apply for workgroup last call. Any more comments? Which one is better, you think? Name?
On the top of the slide, it's like either snooping groups or snooping caches.
Which one is better? One is clear grouping names, and the other one is clear grouping caches. Caches. Nice line. Oh, okay.
Yeah, I don't have a strong opinion exactly either.
No.
One question I have is, did you follow the Yang Doctor review of the IGMP MLD Yang model and the design changes they made in that model?
You mean the IGMP snooping, IGMP MLD
Yeah,
model?
yeah. So I was wondering if any of those comments maybe also would be relevant for this document.
Okay, I'll have. Okay, I will read them after the meeting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe the young daughter is not another young daughter.
Yeah.
Same people.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, if the young doctors are different, they might have had different opinions or.
Okay.
But I think there was some discussion about, how best to augment the existing routing models and so on. And we should follow the same design principle for both that model and this model, I guess. So we can talk about it later but yeah, I think we need to make sure that they are kind of aligned.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, there is another new young model for the IGMP and MLD proxy, and this is an individual model, individual draft, and the first version for presentation. This draft and the effort is from Multicast Young Design Team, and the member is from Ericsson, Volta, Huawei, and Juniper. This is the structure to configure the IGMP and MLD proxy. We augment the interface, and this is the hierarchy. Under the IGMP proxy, we can enable it, and there are some other attributes. If you whether require router alert, query interval, and robustness, variable, and version. We also augment the account plane protocol IGMP to show the IGMP proxy group entries. This is a list for group, and the key is a group address. It includes uptime, fault mode include or exclude, and a source list. In list, it contains the upstream interface and the downstream interface. Most of these attributes are read-only. The MLD proxy is similar as IGMP proxy except the IPv6 address. When writing this new model, we meet an unsolved problem. That is, some vendors, for example, Huawei and Juniper, configure the IGMP proxy on the upstream interface, but some vendor, for example, Cisco, configure the IGMP proxy on the downstream interface. How to deal with that? This is the problem. And as I know, when we configure the IGMP MLD proxy on the Cisco device, we should also configure the IGMP UDR interface in Cisco. But as I know, other vendors doesn't have a UDR interface in it. So in my opinion, I prefer to configure the IGMP proxy on the upstream interface. I think this is more simple. Next step, I would like to apply for workgroup adoption and welcome more vendors. Okay.
Tolles echoed question. So what does the IGMP on the upstream interface have an impact on the PIM configuration there?
Configuration.
No, I'm just saying from the platforms that I know, right? One of the issues is figuring out if you're still running PIM on the upstream or if you're only running IGMP proxying, right? So what you think your model would say about that? Because if the model doesn't say anything, but the mode of operation is if you're enabling IGMP proxy, I'm just guessing, I don't know your platforms, then you know, PIM is being switched off, then this might need to be reflected in some updates to the PIM model.
I think in the RFC about the IGMP proxy, the IGMP proxy is designed to fit for the tree, the topology like a tree. It's a simple topology. We need them to enable the PIM in the IGMP proxy, I think.
Are you going to, I mean, again, different platforms have different ways on how to do it. All I'm saying is you might have mode of operations where on the upstream interface you're running IGP proxying and or PIM. And so the question is, do we have a way across the models that will come up to express that, right? Do we have in the existing PIM model, for example, the opportunity to say disable PIM on this interface? Which, you know, normally we've never, you know, when we implemented IGMP proxying, we in before didn't have an option to disable PIM on the interface, but still do the same functionality as far as aggregating the state, just sending out the state as IGMP memberships. Right, so all I'm saying is be very careful if we assume that we get, you know, representations of doing what the router needs to do with only thinking about IGMP proxying, completely ignoring the impact on PIM.
Okay. Sorry, I haven't considered the PIM about anything about PIM. I will review these comments after this meeting. Okay.
So how many people have read this document? One person. Maybe two.
Mankamna, Cisco. So are we expecting for working group adoption? Because I think still we have some unresolved issues, right?
Yeah, I mean, we don't need to resolve all the issues, but I would like at least several people to have read the document.
Okay.
And you know, and basically support the document. So I think for now, I mean, we should just say, you know, that people need to read the document, provide comments on the mailing list, and yeah, try to improve the document for the next IETF. But yeah, we need more people to review it. But this has been, as you have co-authors from the different vendors, you have discussed this in the design team.
Yes.
You know, there's, I mean, you know, there's this group of people that have been working on all the Yang models, and the same people have also been working on this one.
Yes, the same as the same.
Yeah, yeah. But yeah, I think it's too early to adopt it today.
Okay.
But yeah, we should try to get more people to read it and provide comments.
Okay.
So one thing I was wondering a little bit is, are you trying to make the snooping and the proxying models like very similar? And is there any overlap between the two models?
They are different protocols. Maybe the timeline is similar.
Yeah, I have to think about it. Yeah, okay. Okay. Yeah, but yeah, we need more comments or inputs. Okay, thanks. Next is DR improvement, I think.
That's right. Sandy?
Good afternoon. This presentation is for PIM DR improvement. I'm Sandy Zhang from ZTE. Next. Oh,
Can use the right.
I get it right. Okay. That's the brief update of this version. At this version, we add some statements about deployment choice, and we change some description for readability. Thank Greg Mirsky very much for his careful review and suggestion. And the modification is simply, but there's a new draft from McManus provide a new solution for their improvement. So let us review the content of this draft quickly. So let's see the problem that this draft want to solve. According to RFC 7761, we know that when DR changes, a new DR with a highest priority will replace the existing DR to be the new DR. But there's some time will be cost to adopt the change. So some application, such as real-time applications, like FTV network meeting, will be influenced. And if we use the default hold time, the maximum recover time may be 105 seconds. So the network will be influenced, and the broadcast flow will be influenced. And I see it's in this network, we know that the DR has been elected. The Ethernet means shared media network. And when a newcomer comes in, and the newcomer has have a higher DR priority than the existing DR, the newcomer will replace the DR. So there are still some interrupt will occur. So from this situation, we want to solve this problem. So we think that the DR should be stable, even if the new router has a higher priority. And when the old DR is done, the new router becomes DR as quickly as possible. So the time that the new DR finds the failure of the old DR must be more shorter, and the application will be may not be influenced so much. Next, let's see the solution. The DR-BDR solution is borrowed from OSPF protocol defined in RFC 2328, and but we made some minor change. DR in this solution, DR is the router which has the highest priority. But once DR is elected, new router which has a higher priority cannot replace the existing DR immediately. And the BDR is a router which has the highest priority except the existing DR. And the BDR will monitor the existing DR by BFD or other function. When the existing DR becomes unreachable, BDR should become DR immediately. And the BDR will import the multicast flows from upstream routers in advance, but BDR will not forward the flows until the existing DR becomes unreachable. So let's see the figure to describe the solution. When a new router, which has the higher priority comes in, the new router will send the hello packet that DR and the BDR are all set to no. After the new router receives hello packet from the existing DR, it will know that there is a living DR in the network. So it will follow the DR, and the new router will not replace the existing DR. If all the routers in the network find that the new router has a higher priority than the existing BDR, so they will treat the newcomer as a new BDR, not the DR. When a BDR is elected, So we know that the BDR will import the multicast flow from upstream routers, but BDR will not forward the multicast flow until DR is unreachable. So let's see the compatibility. One new router which has no DR improvement capability comes in, the new router will send the hello packet with its DR priority. So after the new router receives hello packet from the existing DR, it compares the DR priority. If the new router elects itself to DR, it sends hello packet with DR set to itself. So the routers in the network will elect the new DR according to the DR election algorithm. It's a specification of the election algorithm. Step 1, we collect the candidates of BDR, except the routers who declare themselves as DR. And step 2, we select the one who has the highest priority to be BDR. It has a type break for it. And step 3, we collect the candidates of DR. So we collect the routers who declare themselves as DR. And step 4, we select the one who has the highest priority to be DR from the DR set. Step 5, if the DR is no, the new BDR is elected to be DR. And we repeat the steps, a new BDR will be elected, just like the algorithm defined in OSPF, but a little different. Okay. We think this draft has been adopted, I remember, in IETF 94 meeting, right? Yokohama meeting, yeah. So has been years for this draft, and we think it's stable, and we'd like to call for working group last call. Thank you.
Okay, so you mentioned Mankamata made some comments, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So being that this has taken a while, and this draft seems like it would be ready for working group last call, although last IETF, Mankamata presented a draft that, would this be considered competing, or would it be a complement, or what would you?
From Cisco. So I won't call it as a competing. I had just one more way of selecting the BDR. So rather than using new hello options, why can't we use existing hello itself? So that's what my point was. And in fact, I think in last IETF, few of the members mentioned that draft can be as a informational. Because this draft talks about having BDR, pulling the traffic, dropping it, unless you are the DR. So that talks the different mechanism, end-to-end mechanism. I was just concerned about, can we do DR election without even having extra hellos? Because today, when we are sending hellos, we already have the list of PIM neighbors. So why can't the same algorithm can be run twice? That one is the best one is the DR, the second best is BDR by default. So that was my point. So I don't see it as a competing draft to this. It's just alternate way.
Yeah,
Just a different way.
It's a different way. So that's somewhat of our hesitation, is that we can move this forward, but there's another proposed solution that may or may not be more simple. I don't know, but I don't know. I'd be interested to know what other people feel, how they feel about this draft.
So, yeah, great if you can comment on it, but at least my understanding is that the main difference between the two drafts is that your draft supports like a sticky mechanism where you don't immediately go back to the new, if the DR goes down and comes back up again, you don't switch back to the old DR. But apart from that, I think, the working group needs to see, do they want these extra features that your draft support, or do they think that the other, maybe more basic solution is sufficient?
Jeffrey Zhang, Juniper. I haven't read the new draft yet, but it seems that the new draft is just using the just electing a general BDR without any new hello messages, and it does not touch upon other things, right? If that is the case, could the new solution, which is only about the BDR election, be folded into the existing draft?
Maybe.
Yeah, so I think that was also one of the point which we had in mind, and that was the reason we just presented the abstract in the last IETF, so that working group can decide if we want to take that also as an one option to do the BDR election.
In addition, I'd like to see this mechanism defined in this in my draft has been implemented in our device and has been provided to our customer. And we think that the BDR algorithm is mature because OSPF has been deployed for many years. So I think it's our way. But
so Mankamna, so I think if this has been already implemented and it's out there in the field, so maybe the other procedure is kind of just informational, that if someone wants to use without new hello option in future, they can use it. So that doesn't change any protocol, or that is not going to break the working of this draft. So both of them can coexist together. That's what my point is, or my feelings.
Yeah, it's really up to you guys, up to the working group. So any other people have any thoughts on that? Or how many people have read this draft? At least 3 people. Or even, or if you haven't read the latest one, at least like an earlier version.
So we got 4.
Okay. Of the 4 of you, do you have any thoughts of whether it can go to working group last call or not? I didn't really ask a proper question, but
This is Jake. I may have a few comments, but the draft looked technically quite good. I think I see no reason not to do a working group last call. Sooner the better to have it standardized.
So maybe we'll check on the list just ask if there's any objections to our last call on the list.
And ask it now. Let's get some hands on who thinks it's ready for working group last call.
Okay.
We got 1.
Okay, who thinks it's ready for working group last call? Okay, 4 people. All the people that read it, I think. Anyone against think it's not ready for last call? Okay, that's good.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, great. I think
you're up.
I'm next. I'm gonna be very quick. I only put myself on the agenda because we seem to have a lot of time, but we don't really have that anymore. So we recently worked on this draft for called PFM SD in the end, RFC 8364, where we announce sources by sending PIM messages. Since then, I should say, there's this draft in Beer that talks about how to send PIM joins over Beer if you have like some Beer routers in the middle of a PIM domain. So you have like 3 clouds and the middle one is Beer. And if you have such a scenario, I have this draft that proposes how to send PFM messages over Beer so that you can discover sources that are on the other side of the Beer cloud. But also in Beer, there is a draft for how to send PIM joins over Beer, but they don't really have at least in my opinion, they don't have a good solution to decide which ingress Beer router to actually send the PIM join to, which Beer router is closest to the source. So what I'm proposing in this draft is that when you receive a PFM message that contains source group and hold time, the ingress Beer router adds its own buffer ID and subdomain and stuff and metric to the source. And then the egress Beer routers can see which ingress router is closest to the source. But if you have any ideas or comments or thoughts on this, great if you can come to Beer tomorrow, or just send me comments. Yeah, if Beer likes this, then we might need a couple of PFM TLVs, and we have to decide where that work should be done. But let's see if the Beer working group likes the idea first. Okay, that's all I had. So next is progressing IGMP MLD on standards track. Where is it? There it is. Yeah, I only have a couple of quick slides here, but basically we had some brief discussion last IETF. A few people at least think it's maybe time to progress IGMP v3 and MLD v2 on the standards track. They are pretty mature documents. They have been around more than 14 years. There's lots of implementations. I believe it's supported by almost all hosts today, all modern operating systems, and maybe most switches and routers deployed. I could be wrong. Interested to hear what you think. And I think many of us want to tell people deploying multicast in general that they should try to use these protocols. One of the reasons is to support SSM. And we might want to deprecate IGMP v1 version 1 perhaps. Version 2 is proposed standard. If you think they really should deploy IGMP version 3, maybe we should progress version 3. So it's clear that that's the intended document, the best protocol to use. So the questions I have really is, do you guys think it's useful to progress these protocols? One question is, how stable are they, or are there issues? How widely deployed are they, and so on? I don't know if you disagree with what I just said on the previous slide. If we want to do this, we may have to do a similar process that we did for PIM, when we revised PIM to Internet Standard, which would be doing implementation reports and stuff to find out what pieces have been implemented, what have not been implemented, not been deployed, or any interoperability issues and so on that people found.
Right, so I think from Montreal, we came away with two options, right? One is trying to say, we just don't modify IGMP v3 and MLD v2 and take the result of the adoption, right? But maybe one part of the process, which I think is what PIM went through as well, is that, based on what stuff wasn't used in PIM, there was the ref done on the PIM SM spec, right? And so the question is a little bit kind of, do we foresee need for the ref? And maybe the main thing, of course, is that the whole exclude sources in a non-empty list of sources to be excluded, right? I'd be surprised if that's actually being used by application, right? So I'm pretty sure that all the implementations have it, but does that really mean we know, whether how well it works if, we don't have any applications that are using it? So those are the interesting things that I wonder about.
Yeah.
Because that brings us into that whole discussion of, what is going to be, what we want to be the full standard, right? So really the current IGMP v3 MLD v2, or, IGMP v3 Lite MLD v2 Lite, which is hopefully, which I'm not quite sure of all the text details, exactly what IGMP v3 and MLD v2 are, except for this non-empty source list exclude mode.
Yeah, I got the impression, or I know for sure actually, that there's at least one case where someone is using exclude mode, but but it will be interesting to find out how widely is it used. So at least what we did for PIM, and we could do here, is that we had a group of volunteers working together, coming up with with a survey, separate survey for operators, separate for implementers, that we did this in the working group, decided on, or we came to agreement on what the service should be. And basically, we sent this out everywhere we could, and we had someone receiving them, anonymizing the responses, and then we wrote an RFC based on that, which is RFC 1763. I recommend looking at that. And we could do a similar process here. But part of that would be to reach out to whoever might be using this. It could be router switch vendors, but also enterprises and yeah, whoever might be using this. It can be hard to reach out to reach the right people though. But you kind of want to reach as many different people as possible and find out what are they actually using. And then it's up to you up to us to find out, do we think this is has been tested sufficiently or not being used at all? Should we take it out or not? Yeah.
Must have happened when I wasn't there or so. Was there ever a good, readout of 7063 of the process and everything to look up? Kind of some IETF number where to look up?
Yeah, no, I recommend looking at 1763 here. So if
you think the document itself is better than any readout that was done at a prior IETF about it?
I think so. At least it contains the actual service that were sent out to people. And then it also contains like a summary of the answers or responses to the service. I'm not sure if there's a document in general. I don't know if our AD knows anything, but I don't know if there's any documents talking about how to progress stuff to internet standard or the standards track in general and what requirements there are or procedures.
Hey, I'm Lord Yes. Go look up whatever I think it's BCP 25, which is the standards process. Mm-hmm. And if I remember last time I read it, it talks about the fact that to move to internet standard, yes, we want implementations and deployments and no errata and all this stuff. But I think it said that it is not a requirement to have implementation reports. Okay. This was when we moved the set of RFCs, and I'm not sure if it's BCP 25, I'm pretty sure it is, but the set of all those RFCs, it started with, if you remember, we used to have 3 standard levels, draft, proposed, and internet standards. Now we only have proposed and internet. When that changed is when I think that implementation report requirement changed, which is what 7063 is, right? I was going to say that there are other working groups, for example, IDR, that you guys talked earlier about requiring implementations, and IDR requires 2 implementations for everything, or for most things. And what they do is they have implementation reports, but they document them on a wiki. Because the decision was made to do that because the problem with an implementation report is that once you publish the RFC, that's it, right? It's frozen in time. And if someone comes later and now they have an implementation and they would like to document it, well, they can't. I mean, they could revise the RFC and, be a pain, but then you can just go update the wiki and that's it. So I think that is a good mechanism to consider as well.
Hi, Jake. Issues. I've encountered a few issues with the messing around I've done. And the IGMP downgrade is a problem when you have traffic which is only reachable by an SSM join. And I've also observed, I think I'm going to file a bug report with Apple. If you join 2 different sources on the same group with the same group SSM join, it will collapse them to a single, without having the downgrade from a V2 query or whatever.
Yeah, so one thing I would say is, the downgrade thing. I mean, it was maybe useful in the past, But if everyone pretty much supports this today, maybe the downgrade is not really that useful. It could actually be more of a problem.
Yeah, I find it counterproductive.
So maybe,
what I do.
one option would be to say that, the downgrade is an optional thing. You don't have to support that, or yeah. There's also
a disable would be nice. Yeah.
I also think there's various places it talks about how you have to accept unicast messages, I believe, and there's some potential security issues, and I wonder a bit how many implementations actually make use of that.
All right. I'm not sure what the right form is to capture that, but I don't know. I can write a email to the list, but just thanks.
So yeah, okay, yeah.
Just really quick for the minutes. BCP 9, RFC 6410 is what you want to take a look at.
So finally, what will be the action item before next IETF? Because I think Montreal almost we discussed the same thing what we discussed this time. So just to avoid the next IETF, we are not discussing again the same points.
Right. So okay, so maybe the first thing is I want to know is, do people think it's a good idea to start work on this, to progress IGMP-v3 and MLDV2 to internet standard? If you think it's a good idea, just sort of general good idea, maybe raise your hand.
So we see
just and all are you guys interested in
6 hands, Jake.
in participating in this to some extent? Okay. Yeah. Anyone think it's a waste of time, or the protocol isn't mature enough, or anyone against that don't think we should work on this? Okay, no hands. So I think it seems like we should do something. So by the way, this is BCP 9 here, Internet Standards Process Revision 3. So yeah, I guess we don't have time to look at this now, but
when we did this with PIM, it took time, and it was a pretty good effort, but it wasn't too bad. I mean, there was, you ping the Internet 2 list and get opinions from them and get them to fill out the survey, and it takes some time, but it's not. We would do the same thing here.
Yeah. So I mean, one good start I would think is to get different vendors that implemented this to say what do they support, or what parts of the RFC that they skip, or was unclear to them. And if you want to do that, maybe it would be useful to have some kind of template or some way of implement or specifying this, even if it's just on a wiki. So I don't know, maybe if you could find some volunteers that more or less could break down the spec into like individual sort of like parts, and then we can ask each of the vendors which of those parts they implemented, something like that. Would that make sense? Sort of like a simple survey, but maybe just on the PIM wiki. We actually have a wiki. Anyone interested in maybe doing a little bit of work on this, coming up with some questions on our wiki to see what parts of the specs people implemented?
This is Jake again. Are there any existing conformance tests that could be leveraged to kind of look at what the vendors did instead of asking them?
Right. I mean, there's some commercial products, doing that. I'm not aware of any. It would be useful if there was any like open source or anything that we could look at. Not aware of anything myself.
Yes, maybe just thinking out loud, maybe what we do, Stig, is we ping the list about this, but we saw the 6 hands that went up, so we can, form a little design team and just make a plan and start figuring it out and see if people really want to do this. But it seems like people think it's a good idea.
All right. So did you write down the names of the people that raised
I think I've
hands?
got them. Jeffrey?
So I went through the PIM process too.
Yeah.
I think it was a good experience. It was a long process, but it was worth it. And we also have someone from Juniper there who is interested in doing this for the IGP. So I hope more people can join.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, we can try to reach out to the mailing list too, and I think it would be good to have one person from each show, the vendors, if we can, whoever is interested.
Yeah, I think that's good.
All right. Okay. So we'll try to make some progress before the next IETF. Okay. I think we only have one item left. Yeah. So we're actually ahead of time. So we might have time for Hitoshi at the end, but let's see how it goes.
If we do have time, we may want to put him now because we told the spring team that we'd be on at
It's okay.
3:30, 15 minutes.
You want to go first?
All right. Maybe that's a good idea. Maybe. Yeah. Are you okay?
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
Okay, let's wait. Let's just wait 10, 15 minutes then, just in
Okay.
case. Just-
Hitoshi, would you be interested in presenting your solution now? We have some extra time. Yeah, we have time now.
Just a few minutes. Just
Yeah, we are ahead of our
there may be
schedule.
people from spring coming.
So let's see.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. This is a potential solution items for much through interface support for IGMP embedded proxy, and this is a history, and we worked for that one as well as requirement definition, and now the requirements draft is becoming a working group draft, and we just stopped the working for this solution draft because I thought that it's better to wait for finalizing a requirement draft, but according to the AD's comment, maybe it's better to revive the solution draft again. So actually there is no big change from this one. So this is a requirement, so maybe I don't need to explain what is a requirement, and so this is a situation. So different networks, or to make it robust, we have a single network, but the path can be double or triple, and there is a potential situation that the proxy attached to the wired and the Wi-Fi wireless networks, and also. So yes. So this is a benefit. So the purpose of supporting the multiple interface for load balancing purpose, we should have the idea, or we should have the mechanism to support subscriber-based upstream interface selection, and also the channel-based upstream selection. And for the robust data reception, we may want to receive a multiple the same content from multiple interface, and sometimes we may want to have a backup interface, and if there is something happens, some problem happens, then quickly take over to the backups interface. So this is a purpose to support multiple interface. So the upstream interface configuration, actually currently there is no definitive solution to automatically decide which interface should be used to receive the multicast stream or channel. So at this moment, we something like specify the configuration syntax or subscriber address preferences and so on. So this is very detailed. Also, this is okay. So the automatic configuration. This is a well, at this moment, there is no excellent idea how we can automatically configure the best interface to get the appropriate, so to get the multicast stream. And there is actually the potential idea for the single interface selection mechanism using RFC 22991. So this support multiple issues, multiple issues. So this is something like a hash value we can use. So according to hash values, always we select a single interface. So if you have a multiple interface, the hash value select the single interface. But this is something like a static configuration. So this is not well defined to support the multiple upstream interface selection according to the network condition or some policy configuration and so on. So the open question is how routers automatically select the appropriate upstream interface for all channels, and just a selection using hash value is maybe not sufficient. But by the way, how we can know which is appropriate for which for some multicast stream, and how the routers quickly detect inactive upstream interface. Monitoring IGMP query or PIM hello does not maybe quick. Does not give the quick actions, and defining a new IGMP message will cost. So, and what is a trigger when router switch to the secondary upstream interface? Static timer is not maybe not sufficient. So there, everything is open question, open issue. So we need to provide some solution to support multiple upstream interface for IGMP MLD proxy, and there are many open issues, and especially for automatic upstream interface configuration or selection. So maybe this is really this may become a big discussion. They require some enough discussion, and we may say this is something like a RFC 4605 bis, but I don't know. We should replace the current IGMP MLD proxy specification, which is RFC 4605. But if the working group decide to revise the specification, maybe this is also idea. So that's all.
It's Jake. Jake Holland. I just searched the draft. I don't see RPF mentioned. Like if some of the upstream interfaces do not have a route to the source, and it's a known source, like this seems like an obvious addition that can simplify it somewhat in practice, right? Or is that not addressing the issue at all? Like, is there? And I mean, I'm wondering about like then. You know, as a fallback, is there room to use like chemtrails? Maybe find if you're reachable to filter out interfaces that aren't going to work.
Proxybox behave as a host, not router. So there is RFC, RPF support doesn't help because it's just a host. So host doesn't care the RPF. So single interface for multiple interface, how we select the interface. So currently, for example, the Unix box, if we have let's say two interface, then the default interface is just selected according to the lower IP address. This is host specification. So proxy is behave as a host. So this is a problem.
Okay, well, yes, that is a problem, but it seems like specifying that where you have a more specific route on one of them, which depending on the network, right? Yes, sometimes you have multipath to a global cloud, but fairly frequently I find that I have a private network as well, and I know that my source is down that network. But you're correct. What I find is that that it will try to join on the default interface, which is not as useful, even though the RPF would be a very good indication that my source is in the network that I know that it's inside. If we specify that RPF is a good way, when available, to choose the interface, for what I've seen, it solves half the problems. But again, maybe I'm looking at a different problem space than you, but that seems like a useful addition. Is the comment I wanted to make. Thanks.
Yeah, at least a host and multiple interfaces do have a routing table. Typically.
Thomas Eckert. Yeah, so I'm even trying to remember there. For the most time, I remember there weren't any rules in the products that I know that were doing RPF based on group addresses, right? But always only on the source addresses in the forwarding tables. I think in the recent few years there might have been some features come in, but vendor specific, right? I haven't seen anything in the IETF. Is that true?
I know there's a Cisco specific one where where even though you are using IGMP, you consider the RP address and RPF to the RP address to the side.
Right, so because in the end, the main issue here to me seems that ultimately this ends up in the forwarding table of being something like saying, okay, incoming interface is also depending on the group address, right? So you have one provider. I mean, you need to manage it somehow by ASM group addresses, right? If you do SSM, you can simply use normal RPF and say you send out the IGMP join like a PIM join to wherever you get the source from. And I think Unicast is your friend. You don't care about group addresses. So for SSM, I don't know what else we would need to do other than saying, and that would be an update to 4605, which is, okay, for SSM, you simply RPF and send your IGMP membership to whatever your RPF interface is for the source, I think. ASM, I think you're going to manage by group ranges, right? This provider uses this ASM group range, that provider, et voila, you get RPF based on the group addresses. And that's a concept that we don't have. And, if we want to introduce it, it would be a lot more lovely if we figure out that we start doing that from the MRIP basis. And then, whether you're doing IGMP or even doing the same with PIM, I don't care, right? I mean, but doing some one-off that is, not something we want to be able to have generic forwarding planes for is, it's a lot more one-off than for IGMP, right? If we say, oh, let's do this functionality only for IGMP proxying, why wouldn't it equally, be necessary for PIM, right? I think that's the question.
Okay, so in that case, the proxy box also need to maintain the routing table.
No, I'm saying whether you're doing IGMP signaling or PIM signaling to me is irrelevant. The first question is the policy on how I determine different upstream interface. It sounds to me like this is a case where if you want to do it with ASM, which, I'm not sure if something we should still consider, but if you do ASM, it would be on group ranges. We don't have that notion in the forwarding tables when we are thinking about which interface do we select packets from, right?
I may not understand your point, but okay, let's say, so if the proxy box has a routing table, maybe it's possible, but how about, for example, the subscriber-based configuration? For example, even though your routing table for the source select the interface A, but according to some subscribers, like a policy or some business model, I don't know, for subscriber A, the interface B should be used for source. No, even though the routing table may have may point to the interface A for shortest path or for unicast path.
I think the way Jake brought it up is still the best one, which is kind of how do we think about this in terms of RPF selection, right? And that's where I was coming from, that I was expanding that RPF selection based not only the source indicated, but also the source in the group, right? So for example, that a particular group range goes to this one interface independent of the source.
Yeah, right? We need to stop here, but Jeffrey, if you have a comment.
So is this solution draft an informational draft or a standard draft?
Well, at this moment, I don't know. So if we say it should be a 4605B, then it should be proposal standard. But for, I don't know, for solution, informational, maybe.
The reason
But I don't know.
The reason I'm asking is that seems to me that upstream interface selection could be a local decision. It does not have to be synchronized across the network, right? So it's really a pure local implementation issue.
But it's a situation is really same of the current RFC 4605. It's a proposal standard.
Okay, well, yeah, we'll just
quick note, the way it's written, like a requirements document, seems fairly informational. I wouldn't know how to implement something from it right now. So I think the text for a normative thing would have to be different and hopefully shorter, because this explains a lot of context.
I have a question for the Alvaro Ratana running it. I have a question for the chairs about this presentation, but referring to the last discussion. So Hitoshi just said that this could be, one of the options could be 4605 BIS. I don't know if I got the number right, which is the IGMP proxy document. The discussion before was about moving IGMP v3 to Internet Standard. You meant only the main document, not, which is 4604, but it looks like when Magma published 4604, they published 4604 and 4605 together, which seems to be, and I didn't know Magma even existed, which seems to be the intent that maybe both those two specifications went together. So is the intention when moving to Internet Standard to move just 4604 or both?
Good question.
Okay.
And I'm also asking because
let's talk about it. We need to go on, but that's a very good point.
Yeah, I'm not so sure that's, that they have to go together, but let's think about that.
Thank you. We need to do that. Ian, thank you, Hitoshi.
I'm not sure if this is gonna work.
I can try.
Yeah, no. I have to do this.
Okay. I don't know what happened, but anyway. Hello. This comes hopefully as no great surprise. There was a presentation in Montreal on a method to implement native multicast in SRMPLS. There was a lot of helpful conversation both in the room in Montreal and then on the mailing list when a working group adoption call was put forward. And then finally there was an ID that Jeffrey Zhang and a bunch of other people put together that kind of stated clearly what their concerns were. And so this is largely a response to that draft and to some degree the conversations that were on the mailing list and in the room. And so we'll start. Like to start, I'm not going to read these in detail. They're available on the working group repository for the meeting. I will say that it was good. We got a good enumeration of existing multicast technology. From our perspective, beer is wonderful, except that it has this idiosyncratic data plane that is, and this is really at the heart of this, or it's one of the main parts that's at the heart of this. It is not a data plane that is supported in any of the silicon that we currently use in our products. It's not in a substantial fraction of the existing fielded hardware, all of which is available and could readily, and in fact in large degree I understand is being upgraded for segment routing. Anything that does MPLS can be upgraded to SR-MPLS to a first approximation as best I understand. So beer really isn't an option for the platforms we're looking at. I've got a little bit more detail on that in a further slide. MLDP is cool. but it does require LDP as a signaling protocol, and it's an interesting conversation if you're trying to run a network with segment routing, particularly a new greenfield network. Why would you want to necessarily turn on LDP just to get multicast? RSVP, point to multipoint, similar, PIM, et cetera, The mention of MOSPF was very helpful in terms of contextualizing some of the feedback. And I sort of point out 802.1AQ as well, because it also provides some historical precedent, and that is, in fact, something that we're leaning on heavily in making this proposal. Just to recap, if I can be so bold, I tried to extract from the fairly extensive draft that Jeffrey put forward with his colleagues, a few points from the summary. Beer is the best choice. I can't disagree, except for the data plane. If efficient multicast is required, then run these other things. I can disagree. Otherwise, use static or control signaling. And in general, I can't come to the same conclusion you did. So we move on.
This works.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Great. Almost. There's obviously something a little bit funny with the formatting of this. So just to say it again, we like beer. There is no upgrade potential on existing SR-capable systems, other than the ones that have that we've seen people doing early beer on. Merchant silicon for sure. I spend a lot of time reading data sheets of what's available, and I can say with a lot of confidence that there are a few now, just recently, but certainly none of the current product that's sort of in the mainstream and being shipped in volume has it. And those that do have it have a significant premium rate related to it. And you can read it's 3 to 5.5 times the price for the ASIC, and about 4 times the power per 100 gig per 10 gig equivalent. And that's based on me looking at 2 chips in the same current technology. So I'm not trying to compare everything in the soup, the pot that's available, but yes. Do you want to do questions now throughout? I don't care.
Right?
Yeah, it's fine with me.
Yeah, I'm doing this intentionally so Torlis has to adjust it later when he comes up.
Okay.
Greg from Cisco. I'm glad you pointed out. I was going, where this calculation come from? Really, this cost isn't what the cost is in beer at the hardware level. It's what's the comparison between a current chip that supports it and one that does not.
That is correct.
Right. So it's not an assumption that technology.
I'm trying to be very careful because, first of all, some of that information that is anonymized to a degree is under NDA, and I can't really disclose the details without getting in trouble. But yes, they're relative costs of chips of similar fabrication technologies, et cetera, very current generation.
Right. Yeah. Point out, it's a component cost comparison and not the actual logic cost on the chip.
Possibly.
Mohammed Goli, Nokia. So, first question is, I guess, should this be in the spring working group, or is it something
I
that
will defer to my working group chair for that question?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm sure we all have different opinions, but we've discussed this like a year or so ago with the spring chairs as far as multicast and segment routing. And at that time, and still really mostly multicast is not part of the charter within spring. So we agreed that we would address these kind of things here for now. And that's why we're doing it here.
Yeah, so at least our charter is open for working on multicast technologies in general. So at least it could be a possibility to do it here.
Okay, so it would be great if we can iron that out for the future drafts too, in segmented routing domain, I guess.
Yeah. And this has been announced on the spring list today, so that there's people know that this is happening.
Okay.
Short notice.
But yeah.
we did ask, I think this has been circulating a little bit, this particular proposal has been circulating the IETF off and on for several years, and we were sent to these gentlemen back, 6-8 months ago? Yeah. And that was by agreement by the IASG, as best I understand. I wasn't in the meetings, I just heard about it.
Understood. And I guess the next point is, I think one thing you hit the nail on the head is the fact that, when you go to a unicast network that is segment routing, and the operator goes through that much trouble to remove legacy protocols, then obviously the next question within a year or two becomes, what am I going to do for multicast if I remove LDP?
I'll interrupt you briefly and say that for some of them, it's kind of like immediate. It's not a year or two from now.
Okay, I was being generous, but immediate is good. But that said, if you look at the legacy multicast protocols today, MLDP, point-to-multipoint, RSVPT, PIM, et cetera, they kind of go hand in hand to create an entire multicast network. So, I don't want to use this wording, but, beer being the Batman, and every Batman needs a Robin, I don't see why a segmented routing type of solution that brings a point-to-multipoint MPLS data plane or IPv6 or whatever it is into the picture would not fit nicely with a solution like beer. There are even NPs out there that do support beer, but there are operators that feel maybe beer, for whatever reason, is not the best fit for the network. And, something in the SDN land would be beneficial to bring simplicity to the multicast also.
So can you expand a little bit on that? Because I'm not sure I fully understand what you're trying to...
I guess what I'm trying to echo is some of the reasoning that you have here. I'm trying to echo it the same way, and I'm trying to say that even though beer brings the simplicity on the data plane by removing the estate, some of these operators, they just want to grab their MLDP, point-to-multipoint provider tunnels, if you will, and they just want to stick something on the MPLS land that is programmable via SDN or something, as simple as that. Yank the RSVPT point-to-multipoint tree or MLDP point-to-multipoint tree out of your network and just push something with the SDN that does the same thing on the MPLS layer.
Okay, I would generally sort of agree, and at least in principle, with what you've said, and I think that what we're proposing would be one choice for doing that. I also think that for some people, the proposed tree SID with some of the BGP extensions to help put it into the network is another viable way forward. And I don't think that they're overlapping, so there's space for both. And it depends what you're trying to achieve.
That's my last point.
Okay.
The reason I said that maybe this draft should come into the spring is I do see some overlap with tree SID and this.
Absolutely.
And I think we need to iron that out for the bigger good of the...
I certainly look forward to that conversation.
Right, sounds good.
And Ian has several more slides, so let's
let's
try to.
give me
just real quick.
Just quick answer to the programmability, right? I mean, BRTE is also exactly an attempt to make it easier just to have a programmable solution that doesn't depend on the IGP, right? So in that framework, we have that too. Just quick with respect to that whole power thing or so, right? I think we shouldn't look at a very early adoption time frame to make long-term judgments over technology. In my opinion, this is just newest generation chips or so trying to be sold up to a premium. And I'd be very surprised if you're looking at the long-term cost in the future that there would actually
I didn't
be any
push
difference.
back before. Have you done ASIC design?
I've basically very much been involved with getting the whole design of all these generation of multicast in Cisco in these chips. So I understand. I think quite a bit. I wasn't
just testing
because it's true, right? If you bring in new technology in a chip design that was almost done, then we'll get it somehow done. Oh, recirculation and lower performance and all this stuff that all exists, and then a generation later or so it totally looks different already, right? So I think that's basically something we should credit really innovative new technology like BR4.
Fair enough.
And these things do take a while, but the question is really, what is the time frame for which we need yet another solution? And I think that's what we should really understand.
So in the interest of time, because we want to get out of here, I think people read ahead because I heard things being said that I hadn't gotten to yet. I did want to go through these very quickly. The charts are available if people want to look at them offline. But this is hopefully a good illustration to explain what it is that we're trying to do, because one of the things that we got a fair amount of feedback was some misunderstandings about what it was that we were proposing, just in the form of the text in the draft that we put forward. So if you look at this, I hope there's no controversy here, because this is just me trying to sketch out what current unicast SR-MPLS does, which is build a sync tree with towards this device called Z, and device called Z puts a nodal SID or some other type of SID out into the IGP, and all the devices use that to compute this sync tree and install the correct forwarding along those paths. So following from that, if we just simply turn those arrows around, we get a broadcast tree or an all stations multicast tree that is, other than the fact that it's going in the direction, is roughly congruent with the sync tree. So the intent here is that we would advertise a new type of SID and flood it. And just to get to the next step of this, leaves would indicate their interest in being on the tree. In this case, every device says that they want to be on the tree, and so they in turn flood the SID back into the network, and the tree is then constructed in a distributed fashion through compute on every node to build the forwarding table. Forwarding tables in all the nodes such that if something arrives at Z, it will get everywhere. It is also the case that this is a template tree that's used in the logic to produce the subtree that's needed for a limited scope multicast, and that's on the next slide. So with this picture, there's a smaller number of leaves interested, and they advertise, just as I said before, there is a pruning process that's applied to the template tree to reduce it to this subgraph of the total tree, and you're done. And I won't go into the details and read any of it, but it's available online. So the final step within the current proposed document is to provide a certain level of efficiency with regard to forwarding table entries, and where a node in the network is not involved in making actions that are multicast related, we use, and this is important in terms of working within the SR-MPLS framework or standard, once it becomes one, presuming, and that is that there's a unicast tunnel. I haven't filled in all the various arcs in it, so I haven't built the sync tree. I've just built the sub portion of the sync tree that we're interested in. But there's a pink and a purple SID that is the unicast destination, and that tunnel is used as a bypass to get through nodes, and this too is also computed in the proposed algorithms to produce this final graph. And that kind of concludes, for for the most part, the sort of overview, it does conclude the overview of how and what we're proposing. I have for a brief period to look at the grumpy old man slide. I'm familiar with all of these things in the picture on here. I was there in 1994, the important thing here is that there does seem, coming from a certain subgroup of the people that I've talked to about this, a concern about performance or memory or whatever. And I hope that this chart, in a good-natured way, provides some refutation of that. It doesn't deal with doing a good implementation of what's needed, but that's a separate question. And I think we can finish with that. Except to jump to the conclusions. Yeah. So another misunderstanding was that we were somehow trying to take over the universe, and that certainly wasn't the intent. Just to be clear, we had no interest in boiling the ocean, and we still have no interest in boiling the ocean. We see this as a relatively simple thing. We're taking an existing set of algorithmic constructs that were well defined several years ago in work that was joint between the IETF and the IEEE. And there's an RFC that captures the details of that. It was mentioned earlier in the in this presentation, and we can go over that later if interest. But instead, we're looking at taking that and the standard currently as used MPLS data plane, roughly as described in RFC 3032, and putting those things into the SR IGP implementations to support multicast as a optional extension. So to close, we're looking for help. We're asking the working group and potentially other working groups within the IETF to give us guidance about how to best sort of provide documentation into the IETF on this. We're looking for help if there are people who are interested in working with us. We do think that there's substantial useful text, or at least text that can be modified to become useful in the current draft. We also accept the idea that there's maybe other lots of other things that could be said about this, lots of other ways of adding to the documentation of it, and maybe things that could be left out. And we look for some help and guidance in all of that. And I guess the one thing we don't look for is please go away.
Yeah, we're gonna have to stop there, but I'm wondering if people here in the room think that this is something interesting that we should consider, or if the working group should do work in this space, basically, or if you think that we rather should go to Spring or somewhere else.
Mankamna from Cisco. So I won't say whether it should go to PIM or Spring, but I had only one comment that I guess there are some individual drafts in the Spring also, and it might be a good idea to, get feedback from the other working group and authors, how exactly to move forward. It might not make sense that something we standard here and maybe something else they're trying to do in the next room. So it's just feedback.
Yep, thank you.
Cisco. So I don't think that in segment routing, if you enable it for unicast, it makes you change multicast, right? We talked about a little bit yesterday, right? So you can just do PIM as you do today, you can do MLDP as you do today. So then the question is, why would you want to change that for multicast, right? And I think one of the key points that why people want to change their deployment is simplicity. I think it is one of the key drivers that drove beer and why it went so smooth in IETF, because it's so simple. And saying that if you just remove LDP from the network, that means you cannot run MLDP. I think there's such a misconception with people. That just means, I think it should be education that if you do MLDP, you're not using LDP for unicast. You just happen to use the same TCP session and the same data formats. So, but if that's really your problem and you want to solve, then that's a misconception. I think it's the wrong reasons to disable the protocol. So I don't see that as a reason to say you cannot run MLDP because you're disabling LDP for unicast. But sure,
So
sure different opinions there.
I certainly, if you're running MLDP and you decided to turn on segment routing and you decided to leave MLDP in place, I wouldn't call you crazy. However, if you're building a new network and you're starting off using SR, and maybe the choice of your products doesn't include a device that does MLDP, but does include SR with these extensions applied to it, you might be wise to pick that product rather than the one that does both.
Well,
that's me providing a reducto ad absurdum as opposed to giving a full response because we're out of time.
Yeah. Well, but let's say implementing a new protocol is not something that is just simple, right? Because these are different ways of building a tree, right? Let's say how that's gonna work in a real network.
Yep.
Yeah, we'll find out,
Yep.
when we deploy that stuff, right?
You're correct. This is a different way of building a tree. This is a pretty good way of building a tree.
Well, I don't know.
Excuse me, but there is an existing implementation of what we're proposing. It just happens to use a different data plane. So that's not a fair argument.
Well, I think, a protocol will prove itself, running in a real deployment.
And that protocol runs in real deployments. Some of them with 1,000 nodes in them.
And we need to finish here. So let the last two guys online just ask a quick question or comment.
So just a comment whether it should be here or whether it should go to a Spring. If there's going to be like northbound or southbound PSAP type of protocols, then definitely you want to define that in the Spring.
Yeah, I don't disagree with. I think it needs to be done jointly somehow with both of these groups, because one of the other concerns I have that I think is a little bit alluded to, but is there, not all networks run uniformly one protocol, right? You can have a large aggregation network that runs SR and a core network that runs RSVPTE and beer. And it would be very necessary to use the collective wisdom of both the beer working group and the PIM working group to make sure that we get the inner working right.
Yeah, I'm just worried about, if having this in both working groups and which part of it going to fall in this working group and which part of it's going to fall in the next working group. I think that's what we need to iron out, because I'm sure that a lot more ideas like this will come out.
And I think it would be good if we could put our heads together with the Spring working group chairs eventually.
So this blame by association, Tolle Eckert again.
Yep.
This blame by association, right? Oh, it's MLDP or so LDP, we don't like this anymore. This is such annoying and non-technical stuff, right? So, I mean, in Cisco, there was from Dino an implementation of, MPLS multicast in PIM in 99. So that was obviously completely politically incorrect. So, which is why we then looked how to make it politically more correct. And actually, we fell in love with MLDP because the reliability, right? I mean, we did that later in PIM, right? So it had a lot of good things. And the association with unicast LDP was great politically at that time, right? So now it's really bad, right? It doesn't really change the quality of the solution itself. Now, but there was just ranting, and please don't respond to that ranting. And that would be better. That would be better.
You've had your opportunity.
Wait a second. This is better over a beer, right? So, no pun intended.
Yeah.
No, but I think the key thing that I'm worried about is that as cool as I liked your slide about MOSPF back, right?
Mm-hmm.
The way on how to build trees with receiver-based joints is something where we have millions of users and 20 plus years of experience.
Yep.
And doing a distributed tree calculation in the way that MOSPF does is a cool idea, but we just don't have the same type of.
I think we may not have done as good a job of harvesting the knowledge that exists from the people who are using this every day in SPVM based networks, but it is the case that there are over 1,000 networks. They rely on multicast because it's actually really intrinsic to make the bloody thing work. and some of them are at 1,000 nodes and they've been operational for quite a while. So
Okay,
that's a very we're done.
Yeah, we need to stop.
okay.
We're 10 minutes over time. So, oh, but thanks. Thank you.
That's
All right.
the history of my IETF, getting to the mic when I cut the line.
Well, thanks everyone.
So,
Thank you. But yeah, we need to talk with the spring chairs.